The Four Seasons. Beverly Hills shimmered under crystal chandeliers like a city of light within a city of dreams. Silverware gleamed, violins whispered in the corner, and the scent of seared salmon mingled with old money and new ambition. It was a night of deals, not dinners, where smiles were rehearsed. Laughter came in practiced tones, and every word carried the weight of millions. At the center table sat Carter Drake, 38 years old, founder and CEO of Drake Nova Technologies, a company that had turned from a garage startup into a billion-dollar empire in less than a decade. He wore a navy suit sharp enough to cut silence. His tie, a perfect Windsor knot, framed the jawline of a man who believed the world owed him its attention. Around him sat his senior team, people who nodded when he spoke and laughed when he didn't. Across the table sat Elliot Stone, 72, legendary investor, chairman of Stone Holdings, a man whose silence was known to move markets. Stone wasn't a man of theatrics. His empire was built on one rule: observe everything, speak only when it matters. Tonight, he was here to finalize a $200 million merger deal that would catapult Drake Nova into the stratosphere. Everything was aligned: the deal, the press waiting outside, the world expecting headlines of victory by morning. Everything until a single drop of Bordeaux wine fell where it wasn't supposed to. The spillet happened in a blink. Naomi Bennett, 26, the waitress serving the banquet, reached across the table to set down a tray of hors d'oeuvres. The edge of her wrist brushed a glass stem, and a ribbon of red wine spilled onto Carter's pristine sleeve. The music didn't stop, but the air did. Carter froze, eyes darting down to the dark stain spreading over his $4,000 suit. Around the table, conversation faltered. Someone chuckled awkwardly, then stopped. Naomi's eyes widened. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said immediately, grabbing a clean cloth from her apron. Her voice was calm, practiced, respectful, the tone of someone who's apologized for things that weren't her fault 100 times before. But to Carter Drake, humility was an insult. He didn't see her humanity, only inconvenience. He waved her off sharply. "Just stop." "Don't touch me." Naomi froze mid-motion. The tension was like static electricity ready to ignite. Carter's face twisted, the arrogance that had always been disguised by charm now spilling out raw. He leaned closer, his voice slicing through the low murmur of the restaurant. "Don't touch me, you stupid girl. You've already done enough." The room falls silent. The sound of those words hit the air like glass breaking. Forks hovered. Conversations died. Even the violinist's bow paused mid-stroke. Elliot Stone's eyes lifted, slow and deliberate. Naomi stood still, cloth in hand, heart pounding, eyes locked on the tablecloth instead of the man who had just stripped her dignity with a sentence. The world around her blurred, the laughter from other tables, the soft clinking of glasses, all fading behind the roar of her heartbeat. She didn't move, didn't cry, didn't speak. Instead, she took a small step back and straightened her shoulders. It was an almost invisible motion, but those who noticed would never forget it. She folded the cloth, placed it gently on the tray, and said quietly, "Excuse me, sir." Then she walked away, not hurried, not broken, just calm, deliberate, steady, and that calmness was her power. Carter's control. Carter exhaled sharply, brushing his sleeve as if wiping off more than wine. "Unbelievable," he muttered, then looked at Elliot Stone with a half-forced laugh. "Apologies for the interruption. Some people just don't know how to do their jobs." Stone didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He just set down his fork slowly, precisely, then folded his hands in front of him. The quiet stretched long enough to make even Carter's top executives uncomfortable. One of them, a junior VP with too much ambition and too little wisdom, chuckled nervously, trying to break the silence. But Stone's gaze drifted past Carter to where Naomi moved across the room, continuing her work as if nothing had happened. He noticed the small things, the way she still served every guest in proper order, the way her hands didn't shake, the way she kept grace where most would crumble. He noticed. And Elliot Stone was a man who built empires on the details others ignored. A whisper of consequence. "Let's continue," Carter said briskly, trying to reclaim authority. He launched into a monologue about post-merger efficiency, synergy and profit growth, words rehearsed, precise and now completely hollow. But as he spoke, one of Stone's aides leaned in close, whispering something in the investor's ear. The old man's brow furrowed. not in anger but in quiet decision. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. The aide slipped out the side door, phone in hand. Carter didn't notice. He was too busy talking about quarterly projections, the waitress who wouldn't break. Meanwhile, Naomi refilled glasses, her movements methodical and silent. Her reflection glimmered in the mirror behind the bar, posture straight, expression calm, eyes deep pools of composure. She passed by Carter's table again, not because she had to, but because it was her station. She could feel his gaze, hot, bitter, defensive. When she set a fresh glass of water by his plate, Carter's hand shot out, catching her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, but enough to make a point. When grown men are talking, he said through clenched teeth, you stand still, like the help you are. A faint murmur rippled through nearby tables. Naomi looked at his hand, then up at his face. Her eyes, calm, clear, unafraid, met his. Yes, sir, she said softly. Then she slipped her wrist free and moved on. The restraint in her tone wasn't weakness. It was mastery. The old lion speaks. For a few moments, no one said a word. Then at last, Elliot Stone spoke. Mr. Drake, he said, his voice even, aged like fine wood. You know what I find fascinating about people in power? Carter blinked, caught off guard by the sudden interruption. I'm sorry. They think no one is watching when they show their character, Stone said, cutting a small piece of salmon from his plate. But someone always is. Carter forced a laugh. Elliot, come on. It was an accident and I... You called her stupid, Stone interrupted, not raising his voice. In a room full of witnesses. Over a glass of wine. That's not what this dinner is about, Carter said quickly. We have bigger things to discuss, do we? Stone's fork clinked gently against the plate. I thought we were discussing leadership. The room went still again. Even the servers moving between tables slowed. Sensing the shift, Elliot Stone turned slightly in his chair, glancing toward Naomi. Miss, he called gently. Naomi froze mid-step and turned, unsure whether to respond. Yes, sir? Did he apologize to you? Her lips parted. For a second, she looked at Carter, then back at Stone. No, sir. But that's not necessary. It is, Stone said simply. It always is. Carter exhaled, irritation flaring again. Elliot, you're making this bigger than it needs to be. On the contrary, Stone said. I think this moment is exactly the right size. The table's turn phones were already out discreetly at other tables. Guests pretending to check messages were recording, capturing the moment where arrogance met consequence. Carter realized it too late. His expression faltered as whispers rippled across the hall. Stone leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. Mr. Drake, I don't invest in products. I invest in people. And I've just seen everything I needed to see. The CEO froze. What are you saying? I'm saying the deal's off. The air turned to glass. Carter's jaw dropped. You can't be serious. Over this? Over this, Stone said firmly. Over how a man treats those who can't fight back. Over how leadership collapses the moment it's tested by decency. Carter's executives looked at each other in disbelief. Elliot, let's not be rash, Stone rose from his seat. I've been patient for 72 years, he said. I've built patience into an art form. But there's one thing I have no patience for anymore. Disrespect disguised as confidence. He reached for his cane, then nodded to Naomi. Thank you, young lady. Your service was flawless. Naomi bowed her head slightly, voice soft. Thank you, sir. Then Stone turned to Carter. The press outside will want to know why the deal fell through. I'll tell them the truth, that I couldn't afford to do business with a man who couldn't afford humility. And with that, he walked away. The aftermath, Carter sat frozen, the weight of his empire suddenly heavier than the suit on his shoulders. Around him, murmurs swelled. A few guests avoided his eyes. His PR director slipped out, already fielding calls that had begun buzzing in her pocket. Naomi continued her duties until the end of her shift. She cleared plates, refilled glasses, wiped tables. Not one word about what happened. Not one complaint. When the final guest left, she untied her apron, hung it neatly, and walked out through the back door into the cool night air. Her reflection caught in the restaurant window, a small figure under the glow of Beverly Hills lights. But she didn't know that across town, Elliot Stone was already making a call that would change her life forever. The night wind outside the Four Seasons carried the scent of orange blossoms from the hotel garden, blending with the faint trace of rain that had fallen hours earlier. Naomi Bennett stepped out the side entrance, away from the glamour and noise, away from the stares that had followed her since that humiliating dinner. Her shoes clicked softly on the pavement as she walked toward the bus stop at the edge of Wilshire Boulevard. It was almost midnight and the city hummed with its endless rhythm. The growl of engines, the laughter from rooftop bars, the sigh of tires on wet asphalt. Naomi tightened her jacket around her shoulders and exhaled long and slow. She wasn't angry. She was tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep but from years of holding yourself together when no one else will. In her mind, the moment replayed. Carter Drake's face twisted with contempt, his hand gripping her wrist, his voice dripping poison. "Don't touch me, you stupid girl." Each word had been like a match striking in a room soaked in gasoline. But instead of burning, Naomi had stood still, calm, poised, unreadable. She had learned long ago that silence was power. And power, used right, could change everything. The house of quiet strength. The next morning, before the city fully woke, Naomi was already at home, a modest apartment on the east side of Los Angeles. The walls were painted soft gray, the furniture simple and clean, every corner touched with quiet order. A photograph hung above the small kitchen table. 2 children, one slightly older, both smiling with ice cream smeared on their faces. Naomi and her younger brother Eli. She placed a pan on the stove, cracked 2 eggs, and hummed softly to herself. The routine steadied her. "Good morning, sunshine," she called, glancing toward the living room where Eli was slowly maneuvering his wheelchair. His dark curls framed a face bright with sleepy warmth. "Morning, sis," he said, his voice soft but full of affection. "You're up early again." "Somebody has to make breakfast," she replied with a teasing smile. He chuckled. "You know we could order in once in a while, right?" She turned, spatula in hand. "And waste money I don't have?" "Not a chance." They shared a laugh, the kind that came easily despite the weight of their life. Eli was 19 now, but cerebral palsy had left his muscles stiff and movements limited. Naomi had been his guardian, sister, mother figure, nurse, and best friend since she was 16. Everything she did, every late-night shift, every sacrifice, circled back to him. After breakfast, Naomi helped him through his morning therapy exercises. Each stretch and movement was done with patience born of love. She never rushed him, never complained. When he finally rested back in his chair, she knelt beside him and adjusted his blanket. "You're quiet today," Eli said. Noticing her faraway look, Naomi smiled faintly. "Just thinking. About work?" She hesitated. "Something happened last night." He looked concerned. "What happened?" She shook her head. "Nothing I can't handle," he frowned. "Naomi," she placed a hand on his arm. "Hey, it's fine, really. Just another night serving people who think money gives them a crown." He stared at her, his expression wise beyond his years. "You're stronger than all of them." Naomi exhaled softly.
"Strength isn't about winning, Eli. Sometimes it's just about standing." He smiled.
"You always say that. And I'll keep saying it," she said, kissing his forehead. "Because it's true." Echoes of yesterday Naomi hadn't always been this composed. There was a time when life had stripped her bare, when loss came like waves crashing without mercy. She had been 7 when she lost her mother. Her father, a factory worker with calloused hands and a broken spirit, vanished months later, swallowed by addiction, guilt, and streets that offered escape. For years, Naomi drifted through foster homes, smiling when told, quiet when ignored. She learned early that the world didn't slow down for broken children. It was Elliot Stone's wife, Margaret, who changed everything. Margaret volunteered at the community center where Naomi sometimes helped clean after school. The woman had a smile that could melt winter, soft, genuine, full of warmth. She saw something in Naomi that others didn't, a spark of grace beneath the armor. One evening, after finding Naomi asleep in the corner of the gym with her homework under her cheek, Margaret sat beside her and said, "You don't have to keep proving you're strong by pretending you're fine." That night began a new chapter. Margaret and Elliot became her foster parents. Their mansion in Bel Air felt like another planet. Marble floors, endless hallways, walls lined with art. Naomi didn't fit there, not at first. She was too aware of where she came from, too afraid of breaking something that wasn't hers. But Margaret never treated her like a guest. She treated her like a daughter. Elliot was distant then, buried in meetings, investments, and negotiations. But he watched Naomi quietly, noting her discipline. When she washed dishes though there were servants to do it, when she studied late into the night, when she comforted Margaret through chemo treatments years later. When Margaret passed away, Naomi was 17. The house that had once been full of light grew heavy with silence. Elliot began spending more time abroad, and Naomi stepped into the role of caretaker for her younger foster brother. Like he wasn't related to her by blood, none but by choice. By heart, he was her family. The day Margaret died, Elliot found Naomi sitting by the piano in the dark. "You should rest," he said quietly. "I can't," she whispered. "I need to make sure Eli takes his medicine in the morning." Elliot studied her for a long moment. Then he said something she'd never forget. "Strength isn't about what you can carry, Naomi. It's about what you choose not to drop." Dreams deferred. Naomi had been a track star in high school. Fast, fierce, unstoppable. Her coach used to say she ran like she was chasing the sun. Scholarships waited. Colleges sent letters. But when Eli's health worsened, she made her choice without hesitation. She sold her running spikes, tore up her acceptance letter, and stayed. She took 2 jobs, sometimes 3, a coffee shop in the morning, a grocery store in the afternoon, and a restaurant at night. When Elliot offered her a position at Stone Holdings after graduation, she smiled and said, "I want to understand the world from the ground up, not from an office window." So she worked in hospitality, waiting tables, managing orders, learning how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. She once told a coworker, "The dining room is the truest mirror of power. You can tell who a person is by how they treat the waiter." That belief guided her every day. Politeness wasn't her job, it was her philosophy. She never snapped, never raised her voice, never made excuses. And over time, that composure became her armor. The call later that day, while Eli napped, Naomi's phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hello?" She answered softly. "Miss Bennett?" A calm voice replied. "This is Andrew, assistant to Mr. Elliot Stone. He'd like to see you this evening." At his residence, Naomi froze. "Mr. Stone?" "Yes, ma'am." He said it's important. She hesitated. Did he say why? No, but he emphasized, it's not about work. It's personal. She agreed to come, though a nervous knot formed in her stomach. The meeting that evening, Naomi arrived at the Stone estate. The gates opened silently as her car approached the long driveway. The house looked the same, timeless, quiet, like it was waiting for something. Elliot Stone was in the study, sitting by the window with a cup of tea and a cane beside him. The years had etched deep lines on his face, but his eyes were still sharp as a hawk's. "Naomi," he said with a faint smile. "You look well," she bowed slightly. "It's good to see you, sir." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit, please." When she sat, he leaned forward, fingers steepled. "You were at the dinner last night." Her breath caught. "Yes, sir. I was serving." "I know," he said. "I saw everything." Naomi lowered her eyes. "I didn't mean to cause a scene." "You didn't," he said. "Carter Drake did." She looked up, surprised. Elliot sighed. "I've met many men like him. Brilliant, successful, but hollow. They mistake cruelty for control." Naomi stayed silent. He continued. "Do you know why I called off that deal?" She shook her head. "Because leadership isn't measured by how you treat your equals," he said quietly. "It's measured by how you treat those you think are beneath you." Naomi swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir. But I didn't do anything special. I just didn't react," he smiled faintly. "That's exactly what made it special. Most people fight fire with fire. You chose to hold your ground. Grace under fire is the rarest form of strength." He leaned back, eyes distant. "You remind me of Margaret." Naomi's heart tightened. "She taught me everything." "I know," he said softly. "And I think she'd be proud of you." There was a pause. Then he added, "Naomi, I have a proposal for you. Not a job offer. Something different. Something bigger." She frowned. "Bigger?" Elliot nodded. "Drake Nova's board will soon need new leadership. Carter's arrogance has cost him more than he realizes. I want you to join Stone Holdings as part of a mentorship program. Learn finance, management, negotiation, everything he doesn't understand." Naomi blinked in disbelief. "Me? But I'm just "I don't say just a waitress," he interrupted gently. "You're a woman who knows how to lead without shouting. That's rarer than gold." Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back. "Thank you, Mr. Stone," she whispered. "I won't let you down," he smiled. "I know you won't because people like you don't fall and they rise." Morning sunlight slanted through the tinted glass windows of Drake Nova Technologies headquarters, a sleek tower of steel and arrogance that pierced the Los Angeles skyline. Inside, the atmosphere was taut, charged, the kind of energy that hums just before a storm breaks. Carter Drake sat at the head of the long conference table, jaw tight, phone buzzing nonstop beside him. His assistant hovered nearby, pale and nervous. He had barely slept. The headlines had exploded overnight. Tech CEO's racist outburst at Four Seasons, 200 members, deal collapses on spot. Investor Elliot Stone walks out after public insult to waitress. Carter Drake's empire shaken by viral scandal. Every news channel, every blog, every LinkedIn think piece, and all had latched onto the story. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was wildfire. The video had gone viral within hours. Someone had recorded the entire exchange, from Naomi's spilled wine to Carter's venomous words. The clip was less than 30 seconds long, but it had done what no competitor ever could. It destroyed his reputation overnight. The storm begins. Carter slammed his hand against the table. "Who leaked that video?" His PR director flinched. "Sir, we don't know. Guests, maybe staff. It spread too fast. Then find out." He snapped. "I want every lawyer, every contact, every spin doctor we have on this. We control the narrative, not the mob." His CFO cleared his throat. "Sir, the board is demanding an emergency meeting, and investors are calling. Stock dropped 8% overnight." Carter's head shot up. 8 over one stupid incident? The CFO looked uneasy. "It's not just that. Elliot Stone publicly withdrew his investment. He called you." He hesitated. Carter's eyes narrowed. "Called me what?" The CFO swallowed hard. He said, quote, "I refuse to invest in any company whose leader forgets that power without empathy is corruption." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Carter's fist clenched. "That old man wants to ruin me because of some waitress? Fine. Let's see how long he lasts without my tech partnership." But even as he said it, the conviction in his voice cracked, because deep down, he knew the truth. Stone didn't need him. He needed Stone. Social media wore by noon. Carter Drake trended worldwide. Clips of his outburst filled Twitter feeds. Commentators dissected every word. Activists condemned him. Former employees began posting stories about his toxic behavior. Late-night rants, firings over trivial mistakes, broken promises. The digital world had declared judgment. Carter's team tried damage control, posting a half-hearted apology written by PR consultants. "I deeply regret the misunderstanding at last night's dinner, and apologize for any offense caused." My words were taken out of context, but the internet smelled the falseness instantly. Comments flooded in like waves. "Taken out of context? We saw the video. Apologize to Naomi, not to your shareholders." Another CEO who thinks money equals morals. Within 24 hours, Drake Nova's market value dropped by $1.3 billion inside the mirror that night. Carter stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse suite, overlooking the city he thought he owned. The lights glittered like stars beneath his feet, but for the first time he felt small. On the TV behind him, the video replayed again. His voice, cold, sharp, cruel, and echoed back like a stranger's. He poured himself a drink, but his hand trembled. He had been through business wars, takeovers, betrayals. He had beaten them all. But this was different, because this wasn't a financial loss. This was a moral exposure. He stared at his reflection, the crisp shirt, the polished cufflinks, the tired eyes. "What happened to you?" he muttered to himself. A voice from the past whispered in his head, his mother's voice. "You can be powerful, Carter, but never cruel. People remember kindness longer than success." He shut his eyes, forcing the memory away. But guilt doesn't leave when ignored. It waits. Boardroom mutiny. The next morning, the board meeting began without the usual smiles. Carter entered the room in a storm gray suit, defiance written in every step. At the table sat 12 directors, all silent, their faces unreadable. The chairman cleared his throat. "Carter, The board has reviewed the damage, dirty financial, reputational, and moral. Stone Holdings' withdrawal has triggered secondary investors to freeze funding. Our partners are reconsidering collaborations. Carter slammed his palm on the table. So what? We'll rebuild. We always do. One of the older directors, a woman named Lillian Chen, spoke quietly. You don't understand. This isn't a market fluctuation. It's a loss of trust. People don't invest in algorithms or factories. They invest in leadership. And right now, leadership means you. And what about loyalty? Carter shot back. I built this company from nothing. You did, she said softly. But now you're destroying it from the top down. The room fell silent. Finally, the chairman spoke again. Carter, as of today, the board has voted to remove you as CEO, pending investigation and public response management. You'll retain your shares, but you're stepping down. Carter's heart sank. You can't do this. It's done, the chairman said. Carter looked around. Faces he'd known for years now turned away. The people he'd led, funded, and commanded all silent. No one met his eyes. The king had fallen. Not to rivals, not to enemies, but to himself. The empty office. When he returned to his office, his assistant stood waiting, eyes red. They told me to clear your schedule, she said softly. Carter nodded numbly. He walked to his desk, the one he had bought when Drake Nova went public, and ran his fingers across its polished surface. The skyline shimmered outside, indifferent to his downfall. For the first time in years, there were no calls to return, no meetings to rush to, no one waiting for his approval. Just silence. He sat down and stared at the city for hours. Then, almost without realizing it, he opened his laptop. The internet was still ablaze with his name. Articles, interviews, analysis videos. But one headline caught his eye. Waitress from viral CEO incident offered training program at Stone Holdings. Naomi Bennett. Her name glowed on the screen like a reminder carved into fate. He clicked the article. It described how Elliot Stone had publicly announced a new leadership initiative called Project Grace, dedicated to developing underrepresented talents in corporate management, inspired, as Stone said, by a woman who showed more leadership in 10 seconds than some CEOs show in 10 years. Carter's chest tightened. He felt heat rise to his face, shame, anger, disbelief, all blending into something raw. She was becoming a symbol. The woman he'd humiliated was now the standard he'd failed to reach. The fall into shadows weeks passed. Carter withdrew from public life. His phone buzzed less and less. Old allies vanished. Deals crumbled. Sponsors pulled out. The man who had once been invited to every gala now found his name blacklisted from every guest list. He tried to rebuild, reaching out to venture firms offering collaborations, but no one wanted to be seen with a disgraced CEO. His arrogance turned into bitterness. His bitterness turned into silence, and in that silence, reflection began to creep in. One afternoon, he walked past a small diner near his penthouse. Through the window, he saw a waitress, young, smiling, graceful under pressure. Something about the scene struck him. He watched as a customer spilled coffee. The waitress didn't flinch. She smiled, cleaned up, apologized kindly, even though it wasn't her fault. For the first time in months, Carter smiled faintly. He saw what he had lost. Not money, not power, but humanity. A letter. Never sent. That night, he sat down and began to write a letter. To Miss Naomi Bennett, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to read this. But after everything, I realized I owe you something. Not as an apology, but as an acknowledgement. I used to think strength meant dominance, that leadership was about control. You showed me I was wrong. Real strength is grace under fire. Something I didn't have when it mattered most. You didn't just keep your dignity that night. You showed the world what it looks like. I've lost much since then. My company, my reputation, my pride. But maybe I needed to. Maybe losing everything is the only way some men learn what truly matters. Thank you for standing tall when I tried to make you small. The world saw the truth, and so did I. Carter Drake. He folded the letter but never sent it. Some lessons are meant to be carried, not delivered. Meanwhile, in a different world at the same time, Naomi had begun her training under Elliot Stone's mentorship. Her days were filled with learning, finance, negotiations, leadership development, strategic ethics. She was thriving, though she never gloated. When journalists tried to interview her, she politely declined, saying, "It's not about fame. It's about becoming better." Her quiet grace contrasted the noise surrounding Carter's downfall, and slowly people began to see the moral arc of the story. How dignity had triumphed over arrogance. The last meeting. 3 months later, at a business ethics summit, Carter Drake attended as a guest, anonymously, wearing a plain suit, no entourage, no cameras. Halfway through the event, the moderator introduced a new speaker. "Please welcome Naomi Bennett, recipient of the Stone Foundation Fellowship." The audience applauded as Naomi took the stage. Her speech was calm, humble, and radiant with truth. She said, "Sometimes life gives you a stage when you least expect it. Not to prove your worth, but to reveal your character. That night I wasn't strong because I wanted to be. I was strong because I had no choice. But I've learned that dignity doesn't come from power." The morning light spilling across Los Angeles had a different warmth now, softer, more alive. To most it was just another sunrise, but to Naomi Bennett, it felt like the beginning of a promise kept. 6 months had passed since the infamous Four Seasons incident. 6 months since she stood before power and refused to kneel. What began as a moment of humiliation had become the seed of transformation. Naomi had entered Stone Holdings' Leadership Fellowship, a program Elliott Stone personally designed for her. It was supposed to train her in finance and management, but in truth, it was training her for something much greater, to lead with integrity in a world that worshipped appearances. The student becomes the strategist every morning. Naomi arrived before the executives, walking the marble halls of Stone Holdings with quiet determination. The walls were lined with portraits of past innovators, faces of men and women who built empires with vision and grit. Elliott often observed her from his office window as she entered, never hurried, never late, always calm. Her training began with mentorship under division heads: finance, operations, human resources, and ethics. She didn't just study numbers, and she studied people. She wanted to know what made them thrive, what made them break, and what invisible threads connected motivation to meaning. In board meetings, she didn't interrupt or argue. She listened. When others presented theories, she asked questions no one had thought to ask. What problem are we actually solving? How will this decision affect those who have the least power in the room? If this failed, what lesson would we still be proud to teach? Her approach was unusual in a company world obsessed with profit and performance. But Elliott noticed that every meeting she touched ended with more clarity and less ego. Lessons from Elliott. Elliott Stone, now in his 70s, had long grown weary of greed disguised as ambition. Naomi's presence was like a breath of spring in a desert of corporate dust. One evening, he invited her to his study, the same room where he had once offered her a new beginning. "Do you know why I built Stone Holdings?" he asked, pouring tea for both of them. Naomi shook her head. "For success," he chuckled softly. "Not at first. I built it because I was afraid of failure. Every deal, every dollar, I chased them because I thought they'd protect me from insignificance. But no empire survives fear. It survives faith, faith in people." He leaned forward. "I built an empire on ambition, Naomi, but you'll build one on empathy. That's the next evolution of leadership." Naomi listened, her eyes thoughtful. "But empathy isn't always respected in business." "True," he said, smiling faintly. "But it will be, once someone proves it can build profit without losing soul." He handed her a file. Her next project. Project Horizon, a new social impact investment branch, aimed at empowering small, minority-owned startups that had ideas but lacked access. "Make it real," Elliott said. "You'll lead it." Naomi blinked. "Me? Who better?" he replied. "You've seen both sides, the ignored and the powerful. You understand what fairness really means. Now use it." The test of leadership the next 6 months were a crucible. Naomi worked 14-hour days, building Project Horizon from the ground up, forming partnerships, interviewing entrepreneurs, managing budgets. Many doubted her. Some whispered behind her back, "She's just a diversity hire. She's only here because of the viral video." But Naomi didn't react. She remembered Elliott's advice: never defend yourself with words. Defend yourself with results. And she did. Her leadership wasn't loud. It was consistent. She greeted the janitors by name, thanked interns for their ideas, and corrected senior managers with grace instead of humiliation. Slowly, the tide shifted. People began to respect her, not for the story that made her famous, but for the substance that kept her grounded. Her meetings ended with laughter, not fear. Her team began to believe that kindness and excellence could coexist, and the numbers reflected it. Project Horizon turned profitable within a year. Investors who once ignored social projects now lined up to join. Elliot Stone watched it all unfold like a proud father, the shadow of the past. But even as Naomi's success blossomed, shadows from the past lingered. She rarely thought of Carter Drake, but his name surfaced occasionally in business circles, usually followed by words like decline, lawsuit, or liquidation. Drake Nova Technologies had continued without him, but without its founder's vision, it was hollow. Partnerships crumbled. Morale dropped. Eventually, the company was acquired by a rival at half its former value. Still, Naomi felt no triumph in his downfall. She told Elliot once, "I don't want to rise because someone else fell. I want to rise because I kept walking." He nodded. "That's why you deserve to rise." A knock at the door one rainy evening, nearly 2 years after that infamous night. Naomi sat in her new corner office, not ostentatious but peaceful, lined with plants and books instead of awards. Her assistant knocked. "Miss Bennett, there's someone here to see you." "He doesn't have an appointment." Naomi looked up. "Who is it?" The assistant hesitated. "He says his name is Carter Drake." Silence. Naomi's pen froze mid-signature. She hadn't heard that name spoken directly to her in years. "Send him in," she said calmly. Moments later, the man who walked in barely resembled the one she remembered. Carter Drake's posture was humbler, his eyes softer. His expensive suits had been replaced by something simpler, a plain navy jacket, a quiet tie. For a moment, neither spoke. "Miss Bennett," he said finally, his voice low. "Thank you for seeing me." Naomi folded her hands on the desk. "Please sit." He sat, shoulders heavy with invisible weight. "I didn't come here to ask for anything," he began. "I came to say thank you." Naomi frowned slightly. "For what?" "For not fighting back that night," he said. "For not lowering yourself to my level. You taught me something I couldn't learn from all my money and power. Humility." She listened quietly. "I lost everything after that," he continued. "My company, my reputation, my friends. At first I blamed the world. Then I realized the world just held up a mirror. And I didn't like what I saw." He looked at her then. Really looked. "You changed me, Naomi. I started working with small nonprofits, mentoring young entrepreneurs, the kind of people I used to ignore. It doesn't erase what I did, but maybe it builds something better." Naomi studied him, searching for ego and finding none. "People can change," she said softly, "if they're willing to face who they were." He smiled faintly. "That's what I've been doing every day." A moment of silence passed between them, not awkward, but healing. Finally, Carter stood. "I just wanted you to know that the man who once insulted you learned more from that moment than from all his success combined." Naomi rose as well. "And I learned something too, that sometimes the hardest battles aren't against others. They're against who we might become if we let bitterness take root." They shook hands. It wasn't forgiveness spoken aloud. It was forgiveness lived in silence. Project Horizon's legacy. Months later, Project Horizon grew into a global initiative. Naomi began traveling to developing regions, teaching ethical leadership, funding startups led by women and minorities, and empowering voices that once went unheard. At conferences, she often told her story, and not the scandal, but the lesson. "I was a waitress once," she would say, "and someone tried to make me feel small." But strength isn't about shouting louder. It's about standing tall quietly. Her words resonated around the world. Universities began teaching her case study. Grace Under Fire, the Naomi Bennett leadership model. Magazines called her the woman who redefined power. But Naomi never let fame swallow her humility. She still took the bus some mornings, still made breakfast for Eli, who had now started studying computer science online. Every time she looked at him, She saw the reason behind everything she'd done, the quiet strength that had carried them through the storm. Elliot Stone's final lesson, one evening. Elliot invited Naomi to his home for dinner. He was older now, slower, but his eyes still burned with wisdom. As they sat in the garden, he said softly, "Do you know why I chose you for this path?" Naomi smiled. "Because I spilled wine on a CEO?" He laughed. "No, because when the world expected you to fight, you chose dignity. Most people think leadership begins at the top. I've learned it begins at the bottom, in how you treat others when you have nothing to gain." He paused, his gaze tender. "You've become everything Margaret dreamed people could be." Tears filled Naomi's eyes. "I owe everything to you both." "No," he said gently. "You owe it to yourself, for never letting the world harden you." The circle closes that night. As Naomi drove home through the glowing streets of Los Angeles, she passed by the Four Seasons, the place where everything had changed. She slowed the car, glancing through the windows at diners laughing under chandeliers. A different waitress now stood there, smiling, serving unseen by most, just like Naomi once had. And for a brief moment, Naomi closed her eyes, whispering a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you for the fire and for the grace to survive it." She drove on, the city lights reflecting on her windshield like stars guiding her forward. Time has a quiet way of revealing what truly matters. Years passed since that night at the Four Seasons, the night a single sentence exposed a heart and awakened another. For Naomi Bennett, life had unfolded not as a straight line of success, but as a tapestry of choices woven with grace. And for Carter Drake, the man who once believed he was untouchable, life had become an unexpected classroom where humility was the only teacher that mattered. Their paths, once violently crossed by arrogance and pain, were about to meet again, not in anger, not in shame, but in purpose. The sunset years of a mentor. The sun dipped low over the Pacific, throwing streaks of gold across the waves visible from the terrace of Elliot Stone's coastal home. The old investor sat bundled in a shawl, his cane beside him, his once booming voice now soft with age. Naomi sat opposite him, notebook in hand, though he was the one doing most of the talking. "I used to think immortality came from wealth," he said, smiling faintly. "Now I realize it comes from people, from the lives you change." Naomi chuckled softly. "Then you're already immortal, Mr. Stone." He looked at her over his glasses. "And you, my dear, are proof that my best investment was never in stocks or tech companies. It was in a human being." Naomi's eyes glistened. "You gave me a chance when no one else saw me. I only opened the door," he said. "You walked through it." Silence lingered between them, warm, familiar. Then Elliot's tone grew serious. "Promise me something, Naomi. Anything. When I'm gone, keep Project Horizon alive. Let it grow beyond me. Make sure it never becomes about money or titles and only people." She nodded slowly. "You have my word," he smiled, satisfied. "Then I can rest easy." The passing of the torch, a few months later, Elliot Stone passed peacefully in his sleep. The news shook the business world. To many, he was a titan of finance. To Naomi, he was family, the man who had turned her scars into stepping stones. His funeral was small but elegant. The chapel filled with friends, colleagues, and those who had quietly been changed by his generosity. Naomi stood at the front, her speech brief but powerful. "Mr. Stone taught me that success isn't measured by how far you rise, but by how many hands you pull up with you. He believed in grace when the world only valued gain, and because of that, his legacy doesn't end here. It begins." She stepped down as tears filled the eyes of those in attendance. In the back row sat a man few recognized, dressed simply, head bowed in respect. It was Carter Drake. When the service ended, he waited until the crowd thinned, then approached her quietly. "Beautiful words," he said. Naomi turned, surprised but not shocked. "Thank you for coming." "He changed my life too," Carter said softly. "Even from afar." Naomi smiled gently. "He had a way of doing that." They stood in silence, the past between them no longer a wound but a reminder. Before leaving, Carter reached into his pocket and handed her a folded envelope. "Something I wrote a long time ago but never had the courage to send." Naomi took it. "A letter?" He nodded. "From one lesson to another." The letter finally read. That night, Naomi sat alone in her apartment, the city lights painting the room in hues of amber and blue. She unfolded the letter, the same one Carter had written years ago but never mailed. The ink had faded slightly, but the words carried the weight of redemption. To Miss Bennett, you'll probably never know how much that night changed me. For years, I thought success meant domination, that people existed to serve my ambition. But when I looked into your eyes and saw strength that refused to break, I realized power without respect is emptiness. I used to think I was teaching the world how to win. Now I know I was the one who needed to learn. If I ever rebuild, it won't be to prove my worth, but to honor the lesson you gave me. That dignity is the real currency of life. Thank you for your silence. It was louder than any rebuke. Carter Drake. Naomi folded the letter slowly, a faint smile forming. It wasn't apology that touched her most, it was honesty. It was rare to see a man admit he'd been wrong without expecting redemption in return. She placed the letter in a small wooden box beside Elliot Stone's watch, both symbols of lives that had shaped her. A new era 2 years later. Project Horizon had grown beyond what anyone imagined. Naomi, now its global director, stood on a stage in Geneva, addressing an audience of world leaders, entrepreneurs and dreamers. Behind her, the screens displayed stories of startups launched in Africa, Asia, South America. Ordinary people building extraordinary futures with a little help and a lot of heart. She spoke not as a celebrity or executive, but as a servant leader. When I started this journey, she said, I thought leadership meant strength, but I've learned it means service. The real question isn't how high can I climb, it's who can I lift while I'm climbing. Applause filled the hall. Cameras flashed. But in her heart, she was still the same waitress who once stood steady before insult and refused to let it define her. After her speech, a young woman approached her backstage. She looked nervous, clutching a resume. Miss Bennett, she said softly, I just wanted to say, I saw your video when I was in college. I was about to quit my job because of how my boss treated me, but you showed me what dignity looks like. I stayed, I worked harder, and now I run my own company. Naomi smiled warmly. You didn't need me to show you that. It was already in you. You just needed to remember. The young woman's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Naomi placed a hand on her shoulder. Now go show someone else. The return of a changed man. Later that same year, Naomi received an invitation in the mail. Carter Drake invites you to the launch of the Horizon Fund, a joint initiative supporting ethical business startups. She read the note twice, stunned. Carter Drake had started a foundation, named not after himself, but after the very project she built. She decided to attend. The event took place in a modest community hall, not a luxury hotel. The audience wasn't billionaires, but young founders, teachers, and community leaders. When Carter took the stage, there was no arrogance left in him, only humility. I built 2 empires in my life, he said. The first one was made of glass and it shattered when pride struck it. The second one I built on people, compassion, and mistakes I'll never forget. And it started because one woman refused to answer hate with hate. He turned toward Naomi, seated in the front row. Miss Bennett, Naomi, this foundation exists because of you. You showed the world that grace is not weakness. It's strength restrained by wisdom. The audience rose in applause. Naomi stood as well, clapping quietly, tears in her eyes. For the first time, Carter Drake wasn't looking for validation. He was giving it, and in that moment, the story that had once begun with humiliation ended with humanity. The moral of 2 lives. Later that night, as they stood by the exit, Carter approached her again. I think Mr. Stone would have been proud of both of us, he said. Naomi smiled. He would have reminded us that the hardest currency to earn isn't money, it's forgiveness. They laughed softly. Then Carter said, If I've learned anything, it's that sometimes God doesn't punish. He educates. Through loss, through failure, through people we were too blind to see. Naomi nodded. And sometimes he uses the ones who've been hurt most to teach those who've hurt them. They shook hands again, this time as equals, bound not by guilt or gratitude, but by mutual respect. The legacy lives on. Years rolled by. Project Horizon continued to expand globally, sponsoring education programs, ethical AI ventures, and sustainable business incubators. Naomi became one of the most respected leaders in corporate ethics. her name synonymous with integrity. She was invited to lecture at Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford, but her favorite place to speak was still local schools, where she told young students, "Don't let the world decide your worth. Dignity is something no one can give you and no one can take away." As for Carter, he remained true to his new path. He donated most of his wealth to mentorship programs, often visiting shelters and schools quietly, never once seeking a camera. He would sometimes tell his story, never mentioning Naomi's name, but always ending with the same line. "I once called someone stupid, and I was wrong. She was the smartest person I ever met, because she taught me the difference between success and significance." Epilogue. The light beyond the fire on the 10th anniversary of Elliot Stone's passing. Naomi visited his grave. The sea breeze carried the scent of jasmine, Margaret Stone's favorite flower. She laid down fresh lilies and whispered, "We did it." The wind rustled gently through the grass as if in reply. Before leaving, she looked toward the horizon, the same horizon that had named her project, her purpose, and her legacy. Her reflection caught faintly in the polished gravestone. No longer the girl who spilled wine, no longer the servant who stood silent under insult, but a leader forged by grace. As she turned to leave, a group of interns approached the graveyard gate, young, hopeful, inspired by her work. "Miss Bennett," one of them called out, "what's the secret to your success?" She smiled softly, eyes glimmering with quiet wisdom. "There is no secret," she said. "Just one truth. Power fades, but character echoes forever." She walked away into the golden light, her silhouette merging with the sunset. Not as a survivor, but as a symbol. The girl who was once dismissed as stupid had become the world's reminder that grace is the loudest strength of all.